look at
There
the
we go.
chat while people are coming in.
Perfect. And we will let them all in right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So 130 people signed up. And is this going to be recorded? Because I keep getting questions. Will it be recorded?
Yes, yes, it will be recorded. I hit record and it's going right now.
Excellent, excellent.
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming in. We've got our good friend Sue online here, and so many of you are joining us. I'm so excited to see you all. A couple more people coming in.
And
We'll get
let's get
started.
everybody, if you can, just let us know where you are and where in the world are you and your name and just in the chat. And then we know who I'm talking to. And then when it's time to get going, I will close my chat. And Nelsonville, Ohio, Delaware, Minneapolis, Winnipeg. Hi, Winnipeg. I'm in Huntsville, Ontario, which is not my normal digs. Ontario, Bristol, Virginia. Very nice. Welcome, Bristol. Welcome, Vancouver, Washington. Welcome, Atlanta, Georgia. And Hillsboro, Ohio. You guys are coming in fast and furious. Austin, Texas, and Maine. Hello, Lumandry. Oh, South Africa. Hey, thanks for staying up for us. Hello, Laura and Pigpen from Guelph. And, oh, excellent. Southern Utah, Qualicum Beach, British Columbia, Victoria, BC. Hello, BC. All right, that's great. All right. So now Lisa's going to do her thing and introduce me, and I'm going to turn off my chat, but Lisa will introduce me, and then I get to say more things.
Yes, amazing. Thank you everybody for being with us tonight. We are so very honored to have with us Sue Alexander, the founder of Losing Lulu, and here to share the Dog Trainer's Crucible and this amazing 3-4-5 model. And I know Sue will have some more information, throughout this or at the end where the extra training that you'll be offering coming up here. And just so that folks know, this is being recorded. I will be manning the chat. If you want to, if you're just joining us now, feel free to put in your name and the location where you're from, or where you're calling in from. And if there are questions, we're going to wait till the end. But if you want to put them in the chat, I'll be able to pop some up and have Sue answer them. And Sue, I will let you give us a little bit more background and take it away.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to just start out by reminding people, if you could please turn off your cameras so that we save bandwidth. That means that the quality of the recording is going to be in better shape. And also, please mute yourself because that makes life so much easier for everybody to see. I'm Sue Alexander, and in 2019, my friend Trish McMillan went through behavioral euthanasia with her dog Lulu, and she ended up getting a lot of bullying online. That led to me founding Losing Lulu. Trish worked there with us as a volunteer for a very long time, and now we've got about 10 volunteers on the Facebook group who help us to figure out what's going on, what our policies are, and so on. So tonight what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be helping people to understand behavioral euthanasia using a model called the 3-4-5 model. And this is a model that I developed to help my students to better understand behavioral euthanasia. I work primarily with dogs, but not solely with dogs, and I'm not able to, there we go. Who am I? I'm a Canadian, very proud to be Canadian, and I am an outdoorsman. I do a lot of stuff. I'm actually on the road tonight because I'm at my sister's house in Huntsville, and then tomorrow we're going to continue an hour north, and in theory, if it's not pouring rain and windy, we are going to camp out for 2 nights in the backcountry, so we'll be going off the grid for about 48 hours. I'm a dog trainer, and this was developed primarily to help my students to better understand the dogs that they were working with. I'm also an equestrian athlete and share my life with a horse named Kalis, and we've got somebody who has not muted themselves. So I'm just going to ask everybody again, if you could just go to the microphone and hit mute. Thank you very much. And then that way I don't get distracted by everybody else's noises. But most importantly for tonight's lecture is I am the founder and owner of Losing Lulu, the Facebook group, and I also presented the Losing Lulu Summit 2026. And for those of you who are excited about talking about behavioral euthanasia, as I am, we are indeed going to have a second one. So let's start out with some common ground. And the common ground is behavioral euthanasia is difficult for everyone. There is nobody in society who is not touched by behavioral euthanasia, even if they don't have a pet, even if they are not directly making the choice.
Sue, you muted yourself.
No, I didn't. No, we actually, Lisa muted everybody. So I've just unmuted myself. So hopefully you can all hear. But everybody is touched by this. And if you think about it, even if you don't have an animal, if you're on Facebook and you see that the local shelter has euthanized an animal for a behavior problem, you may be feeling grief, anger, frustration, anxiety. There may be a lot of feelings, and it's difficult for every single person. So I want to just name some of the people who are really, really important here. First off, the animal who is suffering. And I want to be clear that we're talking about animals with serious behavior problems, not animals who are jumping up or taking things off the counter, or the cat who has pulled down the blind for the umpteenth time because they think it's funny. We're talking about animals who are profoundly suffering. And there are a wide variety of behavior problems that might lead to a behavioral euthanasia. The family is always suffering. Nobody goes through a behavioral euthanasia willingly. There is no such thing, in my opinion, as a convenience euthanasia. And I know that often people will swap out those two terms and they'll say, well, you could try harder. But that negates the whole problem of the fact that animals who have behavior problems are suffering. The professionals who help, so the trainers, vets, techs, behavior consultants, and the community. And people's reactions are going to vary depending on many, many different things. So let's jump right in now. And apparently I have to click on it in order to go through. Let's start with the fact that misunderstanding is common. So when you get a pet, you don't expect that behavioral euthanasia will be the outcome. You're expecting a lot of things. You're expecting picnics and lying in bed in the morning. You're expecting going out to do sports or maybe hiking in the woods together. But you don't sit down and say, hey, I'm going to get an animal, and most likely someday I'm going to euthanize it because it has a behavior problem. And that goes especially for the animals who are placed from behavioral euthanasia lists. So there's a whole cadre of people who seek out animals who are slated for behavioral euthanasia, and then they will pull them from the shelter and take them to rescue, or they'll pull them from rescue and take them home, or they'll foster them. And these are often very, very well-meaning people who are very naive about what to expect. But I'm also going to say that not all veterinarians are veterinary professionals, and I'm including the technicians, your frontline staff, your kennel staff. Not all of them understand or accept that euthanasia may be the outcome for an animal who is suffering with a behavior problem. Many trainers will say things such as, I have never yet met an animal I could not fix. And I want to really highlight that this is usually the case with trainers who have less than 10 years experience. And, you know, I certainly remember early in my career thinking that I was going to be able to fix everything. I understood how to train the dog. And I know that there are a number of veterinarians who feel the same thing. We've got medications and we can do pain screenings and all kinds of things. And so what happens is when we think that we're able to fix every single animal, it does really take away from the fact that each animal is an individual, and behavior problems are, in a way, illnesses. I often like to say that medicine is behavior and behavior is medicine, because if we're talking about, say, my dog, the reason I knew that my dog had a congenital knee problem was not because I went looking for a knee problem and said to the veterinarian, hey, I got a great idea. Let's do an MRI on my dog and take a look at his knees. I knew he had a knee problem because he was limping, and limping is a behavior. And one of the things that I think really contributes to the misunderstanding is that community members may be actively unsupportive. And what I mean by that is, if somebody undergoes a behavioral euthanasia, their next door neighbor may be unkind to them and say things like, I could have fixed your dog, or you didn't try hard enough. And those kind of words are really, really hurtful for the people who are going through the behavioral euthanasia. And of course, we have the keyboard warriors on social media. And it's the primary source of life support for so many people. And what I mean by that is, if you have a baby who is screaming at 3 a.m. and keeping the whole family up, the first place you're likely to go is social media and say, I'm so worried about my baby. He's been screaming all night long. I don't know what to do. And you'll get everybody and his brother will be commenting on your post. I recently posted that every time I phone my assistant, she is on lunch. And it's become a bit of a joke between us that if I telephone her, she is going to be sitting down for dinner. So I posted for a joke on my social media, what do I do to prevent this problem? My assistant's mother suggested that she stop eating. I'm not sure about that one. But the thing is it's frustrating. And where do I go? To the first fastest place that I can get a reaction. So sharing major life milestones is really, really common. So if you have a new baby, if you have a death, if you move, if you get a new job, if you get a kitty cat, if you have a rabbit, if you got a horse, if you have a dog, if your dog has had surgery, if your dog is sick, these are all things that we share on social media. And commenting on these milestones ties our communities together both online, and that should say online and in person, not online and virtually. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a spelling error there. But when we are privy to other people's lives in this way, it prompts us to do things like, oh, I should phone my sister. It's her birthday. And, oh, maybe I should send flowers because Mike's wife is in the hospital, or, whatever. It allows us to find those connections. And I think social media gets a bum rap sometimes. But we do have to be aware of the downside of social media, which is cyberbullying and keyboard warriors. The keyboard provides a shield for people to hide behind, and it reflects an overall lack of understanding about the issue. And what happens is the person who's doing the bullying is hurting. We know that now. The research is really, really clear into bullying. Bullying in general is the result of pain. And it hurts the person that is being targeted, and it can hurt them very, very badly. It very occasionally provides the person who's being bullied the opportunity for education and change. And that's one of the things that I'm really thrilled that Losing Lulu has done, is that we've provided an opportunity to say to people, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe if we talk about this, maybe if we understand this, we're going to be able to decrease the number of behavioral euthanasias. We're going to be able to help people to grieve more effectively and move through that process. So I'm going to try and give you some information that you can use so that when you're talking about behavioral euthanasia, you can talk about it in a way where people are going to be able to understand that it is not just, well, the dog was hard to live with, or the cat was peeing outside the litter box. It's not simple. It's very complex. So let's take a look at the 3-4-5 model. Okay. And I should have a graphic in there that didn't get put in. So what I want to talk about is, how do we explain the inscrutable? How do we explain things that are really, really difficult? And I like to use an elevator pitch. This is a marketing term that says, if you're in an elevator with somebody, how can you explain your idea between when you get on the elevator on the ground floor and when you get off the elevator at the office? So it needs to be short. It needs to be concise. It should be easy to share. 3, 4, 5 is brilliant because it's easy to share and it's easy to understand. And I like 3, 4, 5 because it's memorable. So I'm still missing a graphic here. My apologies, everybody. This must be an earlier edition. There are 3 causes, there are 4 considerations, and there are 5 alternatives. So 3 causes, 4 considerations, 5 alternatives. So let's start with the 3 causes. One of the most common questions I get asked when the topic of behavioral euthanasia comes up is, why? Why did this happen? And why is not always a useful question, but I think it's a really fair question, particularly for people who may not be living with the animal in question. So the first thing is genetics. We can't change them, and they're very, very powerful. I have seen numbers as high as 80% of problems, or of the problem, can be attributed to genetics. Past experiences. What happened? What happened from the time of conception all the way through the time that the animal has come to the point where they have this serious behavior problem? And the third part is the current environment. So we'll start out by talking about genetics. In general, you almost never see the problem in time to head this off. So if you are breeding dogs on purpose, which is great, I think that breeding carefully and thoughtfully is one of the things that we need to be looking at to get ourselves away from a high number of behavioral euthanasias. Not all of them. Certainly there's room for random bred dogs, but we start seeing unusual breed crosses. One that comes to mind is, I worked with a dog that was a bulldog crossed with a Shih Tzu. And I will leave it to the student to figure out why they may have crossed a bulldog with a Shih Tzu. But I will tell you that it was not a live cover. They had to get a veterinarian involved in order to be able to breed this dog. And this dog had huge, huge problems. And there were huge physical problems as well as behavior problems. Sometimes we have the right genetics in the wrong family. You know, I think we're so much smarter in the horse world than we are in the dog world, because for the very most part, when you buy a horse, you ask your coach about their opinion, or you take a second person with you. And so you try and avoid getting what we call overmounted. You don't want to buy a horse who is going to be too difficult for you to ride. Really, really, really common in the dog world to see somebody say, oh, wow, you know, I watched that movie Max and I saw a Malinois and I want to get a Malinois because there's a movie with a little boy who played with a Malinois and the Malinois was just terrific. Well, maybe a Malinois is terrific. Some of them are. But most of them in North America are very high drive dogs. They're anxious and they have been bred for aggression. We have selectively bred them to do guard work. They don't make great family pets. And the third part of genetics that we don't often see in time to head off, and the only way to head off genetic problems is to not breed the dog, is unexpected or undesired genetic outcomes. So I one time bought a lovely, lovely German Shepherd. He was quite well bred. He was very, very sweet. And he was timid, and I thought he was timid solely because he had not done a lot of things in his life. I bought him at 7 months. He wasn't. He was genetically afraid, and his mother was afraid, and he had littermates who were afraid. And so I think it's important to understand that that is an unexpected and undesired genetic outcome that was the result of somebody not doing their due diligence with breeding. My breeder didn't know as much as she thought she did. And she thought that by breeding to a more confident sire, she could overcome the dam's fear. So sometimes knowing that the problem is genetic it points to the cause or can help to alleviate guilt, and sometimes it provides guidance of what to do. But for the very most part, genetics is a curiosity answer. And I find, though, that when I can say to clients, yes, this is a genetic problem. This is known in this breed. We understand that this is in the breed. We understand that this is going to be a problem. Or we say, well, you have a Mastiff and you have 11 teenage children in your house every day with a rotating, revolving door of adults who come to the house. This is not unexpected. It helps the family to better understand who the dog is. And I'm going to give a shout out throughout this presentation about some things. One of them is Family Dog Mediation with Kim Brophy. If you are in the dog industry, this is a must-have course. I really cannot say enough good about that, because Kim Brophy's work is helping people to better understand what to expect genetically from the dogs in their care, including the breed crosses. I'm going to have one other just genetic word here, because there are random bred dogs that we see all the time, and amongst them is included the village dogs or the street dogs. And those dogs, genetically, we have very good understanding of what to expect from them, and they are in general not terrific family pets, and they end up in behavior euthanasia discussions more often than I would like to see them end up there. So past experiences is the next cause that we need to look at. In utero experiences count. If you get a bitch in to rescue who is significantly underweight with a very heavy parasite load, then she is not going to be raising good, healthy puppies. And I talk a lot about dogs because that is my field. But the same is true with cats. When we take a cat out of a colony and they're carrying an enormous parasite load and they're underweight, then those kittens are not going to be as healthy as they could be. And then we want to ask questions like early life. Was their early life traumatic? And, I'm going to point to rescue a lot when we're talking about early life experiences with animals, because right now in Canada, what we're seeing is a lot of people are bringing up pregnant bitches from the southern states and whelping them in southern Ontario and then selling the puppies because it's now illegal to cross the border with young puppies. But what this means is you're taking a litter full of puppies in utero across the border, and often it's a very traumatic experience for the dam. And that means she's going to be giving those puppies a cortisol wash like they've never had before, and you really, really don't want that to happen. So early life and how weaning happened. If you have a litter of 8 kittens, say, and you take them and move them to 8 foster homes as individuals at the age of 4 weeks because they no longer need milk, you are going to see profound behavioral differences in those kittens compared to what they might be like if you kept them as an entire litter. And I cannot tell you how strongly I feel about keeping litters intact to the minimum age that they should be to be sent to their new homes. And that depends on what species we're talking about. It's different for rabbits, it's different for cats, it's different for dogs. And I'm not going to go into that because that's not today's topic, but we have good science on this. Early transfer from mother to home, to the human home. Was that traumatic? Was that somebody came in that the puppy never met before and took her off of mom and walked out with her? That's going to be traumatic for that puppy. And so what we want to do is we want to help those puppies to learn early how to make that transfer. And we need to do it thoughtfully because that can impact what the puppy is going to turn out like. And the same is true for every other species. One of the things we see in the horse world is foals are often weaned far before they are biologically ready to. And I certainly have worked with horses that have had behavior problems because they were weaned too early. Early training is really, really important. Did it include meeting the young animals' needs for species-specific experiences? So in puppies, that means meeting other puppies and adult dogs and meeting people. In kittens, I'm not sure what it means, but I know they have specific needs that Laura will tell me all about. Disruptions to life, change of home, family breakup. This can really set some animals off. I know with my own horse, when I got him, he had been through, we figured out the other day, at least 5 and possibly 6 burns in the year before I got him into the barn that he's in now. And he spent the first 8 months with me in that barn, taking daily medication to help him to learn better emotional self-regulation. And once he learned what he needed to know and knew that he was home and I wasn't going to be moving him around anymore, he settled down and he's lovely. He's a wonderful, wonderful horse. And then ongoing training. And it doesn't matter what animal that you're talking about. If there is a human interaction, there is training going on. And I say that because if you think about how you feed your animal, when I feed my cat, for instance, I take a handful of kibble, I throw it in the back of her kennel. She goes in, I close the door, I change her litter box, I put her litter outside on the compost heap, and then I come back and I let her out, and then she purrs at me and does all kinds of cat things. I am new to cat ownership, and I'm not sure about this animal that lives in my house. I'm not a particularly savvy cat owner. The third thing that we need to look at is the current environment. So the physical location, urban, rural, where does this dog live? Not all dogs make good urban dogs. Not all dogs make good rural dogs. If you're talking about a dog who, say, is a Xolo, a Mexican hairless dog, and you're living in Northern Ontario, that dog's going to have a hard time. And you may see some behavior problems. I had a dog that I worked with who was a Yorkshire Terrier, and the dog had separation anxiety that started every year in October and cleared up every year in May. And it wasn't until I was in the house one day and noticed that the dog was choosing to lie on the outflow of the furnace, and the penny dropped for me. And I said to the owner, I said, do you turn the temperature down when you go to work? And she said, absolutely. This is a thing in Canada. You don't want to be keeping a house that's 2,100 square feet at 22 or 23 degrees. You want to drop that temperature down. And she was dropping it down to 10 degrees. Well, this poor Yorkshire Terrier didn't have separation anxiety at all. He was cold. So what's the physical location like? Family members. What are their ages? What are their activities? I had a client who had a Victorian bulldog and a young teen who was playing junior B hockey. So he was headed for the NHL. They didn't have time to meet this dog's needs. And so that makes things difficult. And what other pets do they have? Is the animal in question competing with other animals for attention? We see this all the time at the barn that I go to. My assistant Laura and I ride every morning, and her horse for a long time was very jealous of her dog. And it was quite funny because he would get very upset if you fed the dog a dog treat, but if you offered him a dog treat, he got very upset that you offered him a dog treat. And what are the expectations? I think matching expectations with the animal that you've got is very, very important. I do dog sport. I do active things like tracking and herding and obedience and scent detection and agility and rally and sprinters. If I had a dog that was, say, maybe a French bulldog, he probably wouldn't enjoy my life. And I wouldn't enjoy him either. So these are questions that we have to ask when we're talking about why does the animal have a behavior problem? Which leads us to when we're talking about what the outcome might be, we have to have 4 considerations. And we use the information that we glean from the 3 causes, we use them to inform the 4 considerations. And the 4 considerations are the welfare of the animal, the welfare of the family, the safety of the animal and humans together in the household. And I put those 2 things together because the welfare may be good for either the animal or the family, but they may not be safe with each other. and the safety of the community. So let's start with the welfare of the animal. When an animal's behavior interferes with their ability to interact normally with the humans who are involved with it. So I had a horse that we euthanized for a behavior problem. She was dangerous to the people who had to handle her. She loved me, and I have no doubt about it. She came to me at the fence, she nickered, and as time went on, her behavior problems became more extreme. And one day I watched her doing bucking leaps in the air while one of my coaches walked her down a pathway to her paddock. She was going to places she wanted to be, but she was very, very far out of control. And that told me that her welfare was not great because she was no longer able to interact normally with us. We need to ask, do they exhibit species normal behavior? So you can see all of the chewing on the wood around this rabbit's hutch. That's normal rabbit behavior. I had the joy of caring for a rabbit at a nature center that I worked at for a long time. And every year we were forever bringing in fresh wood for this animal, because if we didn't bring it in, she would just chew up the entire building. So is the animal exhibiting species normal behavior? But if they have a behavior problem that's interfering with their ability to do that, then their welfare isn't all that hot. Can they eat, drink, and sleep? And can they participate in normal exercise for their species? So if we're talking about a sloth, that's a whole lot of hanging from your arms from a branch. If we're talking about a horse, that's a whole lot of movement. They should be moving about 80% of the time. That is normal for a horse. And if their behavior is interfering with their ability to do that, then their welfare is not good. Now, I do want to just I'm going to step outside of what we're talking about here for a moment and give a shout out to welfare as a science. And I want to be really, really clear that trainers and behavior consultants, veterinarians, we all refer to welfare all the time, and we all talk about we want good welfare. But we need to remember we don't have as much training in welfare as we need or we should. And so sometimes we may have to refer to another expert to make sure that we are not saying that the animal has good welfare or bad welfare if they don't. And I'm very lucky to have working for me Laura Harper, who has a Master's of Science in Animal Behavior and Welfare from the University of Guelph. And that means that when I'm in doubt about welfare, I have an expert to turn to. So if you need to talk to an expert about animal welfare, we do offer consultations, and Laura is available to do those consults for a fee. Then we've got to look at the welfare of the family. And this is something that I think our veterinary social work colleagues are really integrally involved with. I think that they are much more on the job for human welfare than trainers, behavior consultants, and veterinary professionals are. But I want to tell you, there are a few things that you need to know if you are working with a family that has an animal with a behavior problem. And that is, human families are complex and ever-changing. People deserve to be able to have guests, get repairs done to the home. They need to be going on vacation. They should be able to buy furniture. And living with an animal with a serious behavior problem can end up creating isolation. So I know families where the children are not allowed on a specific floor of the house because they have a dog who is dangerous to the children. That's negatively impacting the children's welfare, and it's very much skewing the children's picture of what living with an animal might be. I know many, many families who, when they finally decide to euthanize an animal, a dog who's got a serious behavior problem, will say to me, I haven't been on vacation in 8, 9, 10 years. We haven't been able to have guests over since the children were babies. We haven't been able to celebrate Christmas, Easter, Canada Day, the 4th of July, any of those big holidays, Thanksgiving, that people have. They can't participate because somebody has to either be home with the animal or it's too dangerous for people to come in with the animal. And that is not contributing to good family welfare. And if you're in doubt about the welfare of the family, they probably don't have terrific welfare, and they may not always see it for themselves. And if you are a pet guardian who is living with an animal with a serious behavior problem, I encourage you to think about the welfare of your family when you're evaluating the next steps that you take with your animal friend or family member. The next thing I want to think about is the safety of the animal and the humans together. I love this picture. This is a little child who is being very gentle with their guinea pig, and their guinea pig is being very appropriate with them. They're just having a moment together. Animals and people deserve to be safe with one another. And I think there's nothing worse than living with an animal that you're afraid of. I rode a horse that I was afraid of for many, many years, and it was very, very hard on me. And it changed how I felt about myself, about my well-being, and she, in the end, was not safe. And that's the horse that I euthanized for a behavior problem. This is of particular interest for people who are placing animals from a shelter or rescue. And what I always think about is, before we send an animal home, we like to make sure that the people are going to be safe. We don't want to send an animal home so that it's going to be abused or mishandled or mistreated in some way. But let's turn it around. We should also not be placing animals with someone if the animal might cause harm. And this is something that we are not paying nearly enough attention to. It's getting better, but I'm going to tell you that over the 33 years of my career of seeing behavior cases, 80% of the animals that I worked with were sourced from rescue or shelter. And that is really a problem. And, we might say, okay, well, why is that? And we could go down that road. But I think that what it shows is we were not taking the safety of the humans into enough account. And when the animal is not safe with the human and the human is not safe with the animal, and that can happen as well. I know on Losing Lulu from time to time, we'll see somebody who says, I had to euthanize my pet because someone in our household was unsafe to the animal and it made the animal unsafe with us. And I think it's always such a tragedy. And again, this is where veterinary social workers can really come in and help us out. Finally, we need to remember the safety of our communities. Animals can be dangerous, and dogs are of particular interest. So I wasn't able to find a source for it, but in my notes from APDT last year, I think it was APDT, but it might have been aggression in dogs, 4.5 million people in the United States are recorded to have been bitten annually, and that's been very, very consistent for a little while. According to StatsCan, Statistics Canada, children aged 5 to 9 are at the highest risk. 32.7% of injuries happen between 4 and 8 p.m., and weekends are way overrepresented. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it. Between 4 and 8 p.m., we're tired. We're coming home from the end of our workday. Our children are coming home from the end of their school day. Everybody's tired and cranky, and maybe they haven't had dinner yet. And the dog is going to experience that as well. What can we do? Hey, how about we start feeding the dog at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and keep him in his crate until 8 when the children go to bed? It's going to decrease our bites, and it's a very, very easy thing to do. And like I said at the very beginning, I want to talk about behavioral euthanasia because thinking about these things can help us to avoid the problem. Okay? Over 35% of bites happen to someone who knew the dog. And I think this is really, really important. We are pretty good at telling people, don't run up to a strange dog, although I will tell you, as the owner of a German Shepherd who thinks he's the Walmart greeter of the world, people run up to my German Shepherd a surprising amount of the time. And, I keep thinking, these are police dogs, guys. These are dogs who were bred to do protection work. Now, fortunately, my German Shepherd, I can't see him biting somebody. That's been challenged enough times now that I think it would be very, very unlikely. He likes it when people come and run up to him. My last German Shepherd did not like it, and I had to be much more careful with him, particularly with people who knew him well. Let's talk about communities too, because just like families, communities are complex. The animals within them need to be able to cope. And community members are diverse. You get babies, children, adults, old people, other animals. We get people in uniforms. We get people who limp, people who walk with walkers and use wheelchairs or knee scooters or everything. Everyone deserves to be safe in their communities. And we should be very, very aware of that when we are making decisions about behavioral euthanasia. If the animal is breaking through the front door to chase children down the street, that is not an animal who can live in the community. And we then have to look at what the alternatives are for that animal. So let's talk about our 5 alternatives. They are: live with the problem. And usually by the time we have a discussion about behavioral euthanasia, this is no longer a reasonable outcome. We can begin or continue training. We can refer to someone with more information, education, or experience. We can rehome. Or finally, we can euthanize. So those are the 5 alternatives that I present to my clients when we're talking about behavioral euthanasia. And I always start with talking about the 3 causes and the 4 contributing factors, because it informs how we make our decision between the 5 alternatives. So I want to just have a word here. We need to help people to make reasonable choices. And what is reasonable for one family may not be reasonable for another. I can help difficult dogs. I've lived with many, many very difficult dogs. I have no idea how to help a difficult rabbit. If you have an aggressive rabbit, please do not send it to me for help, because I have no clue. And it would be unreasonable for me to keep a difficult rabbit going in my household. Just be aware of the ruler by which you and others judge a situation. And going back to the keyboard warriors place, this is where we run into problems, is that what is reasonable for the person who's hiding behind the keyboard may not be reasonable for the family who lives with the animal with the behavior problem. So let's start with living with the issue. Sometimes small management changes can allow families to live with big problems. Look at my example of, if you know that aggression is more likely between 4 and 8 in the afternoon, your children are coming home from school at 3:45, pop the dog in the kennel at 4 o'clock, have a nice afternoon with your kids, maybe bring the dog out for a training session just before bed. Don't let anybody kiss the dog on the nose, because that's how dogs end up biting small children. And at 8 o'clock, the dog can come back out again because the house has settled down for its evening activities. And if you have a dog who reliably is struggling with the children in the home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a crate is a beautiful solution. So we need to look at things like times, locations, activities. We need to be looking at things like, if you have a cat, providing them with a cat ladder like this may be the solution for the dog who is giving the cat a hard time. Okay, we need to consider things like food, sleep, and medications. The number of dogs that I've worked with who have really crummy quality of sleep is astounding. It's one of the things that I always scream for when I'm doing a behavior consultation. How much sleep does your dog get? Where does he sleep? And what time does he sleep? And so if we've got a dog who's getting 3 hours of sleep a night, like I had one time, I had a Blue Heeler client, and the wife was a nurse, and she worked rotating shifts. The husband was a long-haul trucker, and her brother and father shared the house with them, and they were both in the Merchant Marine, and they would be in the house for 3 to 10 days, and then they would be out of the house for 3 to 6 months. And this meant that their house was incredibly chaotic. Well, this poor Australian cattle dog, he never slept because he spent all night waiting for people to come home because he could never tell when it was going to happen. Be aware of sleep. Look at the medications. Some medications cause behavior problems. And so if the dog is on medication, as a behavior consultant, it is not your job to say this dog can or cannot be on medication. You can choose not to work with dogs on medication, but you need to know that the dog is on medication. And it's really worthwhile having a conversation with the vet about what side effects that medication may have. And the final thing that we need to do is make sure that different species have species-specific needs. Rabbits need to chew wood. That is what they are bred to do. They need to do it. Deer need to eat their own feces because they cannot digest properly if they don't. Cats need to have multiple surfaces to jump up and down on. They're not on-the-ground animals. And it doesn't mean they need to be on your kitchen counter. Mine isn't. But it does mean that they need to have the opportunity to climb. So helping people to understand what to expect from their animals is really, really important. And this goes doubly when we start talking about animals who have been bred for specific work. If you have a Dutch Shepherd, expect that he is likely going to be suspicious of strangers, and he may bite unless you do an awful lot of work to teach him alternatives and provide him with appropriate outlets. We don't want to be surprised by what we see. And some of the time, I have been able to help people to better understand their animal's needs so that they no longer feel the need to talk about behavioral euthanasia because they can give their animal what their animal needs. Begin or continue training. I always like to remember that behavior changes. That's what we do, is we change behavior. It doesn't matter whether we're training or on purpose or not, but behavior changes. And some of the time, we can change the behavior problem so that you can live with the animal. So if training is already ongoing, you need to consider how effective it has been. You may need to consider changing tactics. You may need to send the animal to a different trainer. I ride dressage. This horse is not in a dressage bridle. I don't know what to do with him. But if he was pulling through my hands, I would probably look at the problem through the lens of a dressage rider and say, well, maybe we could put a bit in his mouth. Maybe that's not the right answer for this horse. I don't know. But changing tactics may be a consideration. If training has not yet begun, I think it needs to be considered. It should always be a consideration because training is the change in behavior. And if the behavior is a problem, maybe we're able to help that animal out if we're able to start training. Next thing I want to talk about is refer. Referring to someone who has more experience or education is always a good idea. So if you're a trainer or behavior consultant, find someone who knows more than you do. I have people that I can refer dogs to, and I've been doing this for 33 years. If I can't refer somebody to them, I have colleagues that I can consult with. And the same is true of veterinarians, okay? Always refer your cases to a veterinarian. Make sure that the veterinarian is involved with the decision before you have to talk about it, about behavioral euthanasia. One of the things we now know is that up to 82% of behavior cases in dogs include a comorbidity with pain. You can look that up in the Veterinary Ireland Journal, volume 14, number 2 by Susie Walsh, MSc, but also you could listen to Caitlin Boyd on the Losing Lulu 2026 summit. And if you need, I can provide you with a link so that you can purchase that if you have not done so already. You may need to seek a veterinary referral to a specialist. I remember early in my career, I had what I referred to as the year of small white fluffy dogs. And I had more small white fluffy dogs who ended up having seizures than I have ever seen before or since. I think I had 7 of them that ended up all in neurology at the University of Guelph, and they were from all over the place. So I had 1 in Toronto, I had 2 or 3 in Guelph, I had a few in Cambridge. And the problems were neurological, and I can't help neural problems. I am not a neurologist. But don't forget, veterinary allergists are really, really important. I remember going to a talk one time in the early 2000s with a veterinary immunologist who said when they're itchy, they're bitchy, and when they're bitchy, they're itchy. And I think that this is really, really true. When they're itchy, they're not going to have good normal behavior. And if we can solve it medically, hey, isn't that the name of the game? Also, don't forget our veterinary behaviorist colleagues always have a connection with at least one veterinary behaviorist, no matter where you sit in the industry, whether you're a trainer, behavior consultant, veterinary social worker, veterinarian, vet tech, know a veterinary behaviorist, because behavior is medicine and medicine is behavior. We can look at rehoming. Sometimes rehoming is possible. Predatory farm dogs can move to the city where they're never going to see another lamb. Highly active city dogs maybe do better in a more rural setting where they can get more walks. I do want to just mention the mythical home and farm in the country. Farms are more like machine shops. And so if you wouldn't send the dog to a machine shop, don't send the dog to a farm simply to try and resolve the problem. But if you send the dog to somebody who is an avid hiker who lives out of the major city area, that can solve some problems. Cats who fight can sometimes be resolved entirely by moving to an only cat home. And rabbits who are aggressive to children, which I've heard a fair amount of since I've been on Losing Lulu, may actually benefit living in a farm environment. And maybe that means that they're a meat rabbit, and maybe that's not a better outcome for the family. We can't make that decision. But that rabbit, if they are not coping well in a pet home, we have to look at what alternatives there are for it. And we have to just understand that when we're rehoming, we can't just go poof, there's a magic home for every single behavior problem. So let's be aware, there is no hermit off the grid who really wants to take on every single difficult animal. If the animal is dangerous in their current home, they're most likely going to be dangerous in their next home. This is a fact. And I think one of the things I would like to get out of the vocabulary is the idea of death row dogs. I adopted a death row dog. And I have a lot of compassion for anybody who wants to work with challenging dogs. But if the dog is already on the behavioral euthanasia list at a shelter, that is not a dog who should be going home. That is a dog who should be euthanized. Unfortunately, sadly, but I have worked with far too many of these dogs and read far too many sad, sad stories on Losing Lulu of
I think we're having a bit of technical difficulties here. Just hold, please. We are going to let Sue back in as soon as her internet lets her. Oh goodness, right at the end. I'm gonna stay on, so hopefully she can come back and share the end here. I am going to ask about the slides, and I know you guys were asking about, someone was asking about the recording. We will have that uploaded on the IAVSW YouTube channel, and I will see if I can email that out to folks once we get that back.
Lisa, if you don't mind me jumping in because I'm Sue's assistant, so I can make sure that we get like a full recording if she's not able to come back on, and we could just like re-record it and make sure that you guys have access to the full thing. I suspect that her internet may have cut out because she's out in Ontario weather, which is looking pretty gloomy right now. So
Oh, goodness. Thank you, Laura. Yes, I was like, oh no, we're right at the end when we can get a nice, rounded out everything and ask some questions because I know there was a couple in the chat here too. So,
or you can also text her if you want. That helps.
I don't know about everybody else, but I definitely learned some new things this evening. So I'm very grateful for this information. Um,
I've just texted Sue. If anyone has any questions for me, I'm very familiar with Sue's content, so I can maybe jump in here.
Sure. I know there was a couple comments and questions towards the beginning when they were talking about the genetics.
Yeah, so I know that there is a number of research on epigenetics. I do know Kim talks about that in her course as well. Um, so like the answer is, do we know about it? Yes, we know it happens. I don't think we know a ton about how or why it happens yet. It's still like a very, I think it's like one of those new hot topics in research as far as I'm aware. It's not my area of specialty, but I think
Here's
it,
Sue.
oh, good.
Hello,
You got to
Sue.
unmute yourself, Sue.
We love technology and all of its glory.
Oh, we so love it. We so love it. We so love it. Ah!
Well, we're grateful to Laura for stepping in and helping out too, but we'll let you take it and continue.
Oh, goody. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. So, did I move to the next slide after this?
I think
You
you were
had just finished
finishing
this
up.
part.
You would, yeah, I think you
Mhm.
just
Just
finished this
finished
slide.
that one. I'm so sorry, folks. All right. Okay. So, I want to point out that people often misunderstand what they're taking on when they agree to take on a troubled animal, which leads us to the next thing we've got to talk about, because you're going to get asked about it or you're going to think about it, and that is sanctuaries. Very, very few of them are reputable, and even fewer of them are sustainable. So usually the way that a sanctuary operates is it seeks out animals who, for whatever reason, can no longer be cared for by their people and who need somewhere to live for the rest of their lives. And the way that it works is you pay a dowry. And one of the things that people don't think about is if you are surrendering a 3-year-old dog to a sanctuary and it takes $30 a day for that dog to be cared for, and the sanctuary, let's just give you a round number of $3,000, says we want $3,000 to take care of your dog for the rest of his life, that means that the sanctuary is only able to take care of your dog for 1,000 days. So 1,000 days? No, 100 days. Okay, so $3,000 at $30 a day gets used up in 100 days. So when you get to 100 days, you got to take on a second dog at $3,000, except now, instead of 100 days, it's only going to support them for 50 days. And after 50 days, you have to take on a third dog. And this decay means that eventually you need to be taking on more and more and more dogs simply to cover the cost of caring for the animals in your care. And what it means is these dogs may be breathing, but I think I really like the title of, I think it was Katina's talk, Katina Jones on the Losing Lulu Summit 2026, who talked about the difference between living and being alive. These animals are living, but they're not alive. And if you look up some of the sanctuary busts, you're going to find out about animals who have been horribly, horribly, horribly neglected. Animals who never get their toenails trimmed for years. Animals who are being sprayed down with fire hoses. Animals who never, ever, ever get out of a very kennel. And that's appalling. And so I think that what happens is many people are very well-meaning. They want to run a sanctuary. Very few of them are able to do so effectively. And I'm going to give a shout out to one that does a good job, and that is Old Dogs Go to Helen. She specializes in elderly dogs. They are going to her for very short term, and she raises money to support them. And she is not an animal hoarder. But there are an awful lot of them that become animal hoarders. And I think for the vast majority of them, that is not what they intended to do when they opened up a sanctuary. But my clients are always looking for sanctuaries. They're grasping at straws because they don't want to euthanize their animals. Nobody does. But sometimes that is the most humane alternative. So let's talk about euthanasia. This is the choice when nothing else is reasonable. Often, the animal is otherwise healthy. And remember that behavioral health is health. Behavioral health is health. So when you have a 9-month-old dog who has chewed his foot down to the bone, in spite of surgeries, in spite of medical care, but he keeps chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing it, that is not a healthy animal. But if he's 9-month-old, people are often going to say to you, well, maybe we can change this. Maybe we can help this. And sometimes we can, but often we can't. And often the problem is not with the primary caregiver. So you look at this dog. If this dog has a serious, serious behavior problem, he's looking at his person with love in his eyes. But maybe he's not able to live with anyone other than the caregiver. And this leads to very, very mixed emotions for people who are facing behavioral euthanasia, because it may not be safe for them. Let's say this man, he's older. Let's say that he has a medical condition that necessitates having home care in to change diabetic ulcers bandages on his legs every day. But the nurse can't come in because the dog can't cope. The nurse has been bitten, and the dog screams and throws himself at the wall while the nurse is home, and maybe the man isn't able to go out to get health care. Now what do we do? Maybe we can rehome. But if the dog is aggressive to every single person other than this man, what do we do? And I worked with a dog many, many years ago. It was a Labrador Retriever, and it was an elderly lady, and she was moving into town from her farm, and her son-in-law was there to help, and we were trying to see if we couldn't help this dog become social enough to move in town. So I drove up the laneway, and I had a big chub of rollover in my hand. I got out of the car, and the dog rushed me, and this dog was not kidding. He had no time or patience for anybody on his property. He had bitten a number of people. I threw a 2-kilogram chub of rollover, which is a sausage made for dogs. 2 kilos would be about 5 pounds. Threw it, hit the dog in the face, and he kept right on trucking. I got back in the car. He ate 5 pounds of rollover. The son-in-law came out and talk to me. We confined the dog. We had a long conversation. Unfortunately, his mother had dementia as well. Mother-in-law had dementia as well. But, you know, he said to me, they've had Labradors all their lives. What's wrong with this one? And I said, yeah, but when her husband was alive, there were more people who came to the farm. The puppy got to meet people. It was a dairy farm. The puppy got to meet the guy who came to collect the milk and the workers who came to work with the cows and the veterinarian and the children and the nieces and nephews and grandchildren and children. And their earlier dogs were perfectly socialized, but she'd been living alone with this dog for years. And this dog just did not want to accept other people. And they ended up choosing behavioral euthanasia. But it was a tragedy because they had raised dogs exactly the same way their whole life. And this was not a dog who was accepting anybody other than this old lady and her son-in-law. And, you know, when I think back to that case, I think it's a perfect example of a situation where the dog, if it had been able to live with the old lady on the farm forever, it probably would have been okay, but it wasn't suitable to rehome. It wasn't safe in the community. It wasn't safe with anybody other than the old lady. And we were faced with a terrible, terrible decision. So nobody wanted to make the decision, but that was the decision that in the end was made. I just want to come back and circle back. The choice is never, ever, ever easy. And if it ever becomes easy for you, it's time to get out of that industry. No matter what the outcome is, the choice isn't easy, even if the outcome is simply to change the management, because it means that somebody has stayed up all night thinking about this at some point. And having a framework to understand it helps a lot. Knowing why doesn't always change the outcome. Sometimes it does. You get a police dog who's in the hands of a family. Maybe we can send it to somebody who wants to do protection sport. Having guardrails to help make this decision or guide the discussion can really help, though. And laying out the alternatives makes the outcomes clearer for the family. And often when I say, okay, can we live with the problem? The people are the first ones to say, absolutely not, we can't. I say, do you want to keep training? We've been training for 2 years, Sue, and we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars on this, and it's really interfering with our lives. I say, okay, do you want me to refer you to the veterinary behaviorist? Well, we tried medication and it didn't agree with him, and we tried a different medication and we had to spend a lot of money on that. And the veterinarian told us that this may not help. All right, so the next thing we look at is there any way to rehome this dog? And that's where things often get quiet. And my clients will pause and they'll say, I've called all the rescues. I've called the shelter. I've asked my sister. I've asked my friends. And nobody wants this dog. And then I say, okay, let's talk about behavioral euthanasia. Often the conversation starts with, the one thing I'm never, ever going to consider, not ever, is behavioral euthanasia. And at the end, what they say to me is, I can see that my animal is suffering, and I love him, and I want to alleviate his suffering. And if we can always remember that when we're talking about an animal with a profound physical problem, so if we have a 9-month-old, let's say a 9-month-old golden retriever who has profound hip dysplasia, and they're not able to walk, and they go in and they do the RADs and they do a CT and they do the MRI, and the surgeon says, in this case, the cause of the profound hip dysplasia is a malformation not only of the head of the femur, but also of the pelvis and lower back, and we can't replace his lower back, and there's nothing I can do for you. And if I said to you that dog would have to live for the next 9 or 10 years in extreme pain and on medication every day and never be able to walk or run or play or go on family picnics, you would probably consider alleviating the suffering. And I want to say that when I'm talking to people about behavioral euthanasia, I'm talking to people about alleviating suffering. And that's what it comes down to in the end for me. Thank you so very much for participating tonight. I didn't make a slide for it, but we do have a course coming up. It starts on Sunday. It is called Approaching the Hardest Choice. I'm going to ask Laura to drop the link in the chat, if you would, please.
Already on it.
Already on it. We have a 4-week course where we go further in depth, not just in understanding behavioral euthanasia, but how to talk about it and what happens and what the process looks like. I can be reached at sue@thedogtrainerscrucible.ca. You can also learn a little bit more about us at thedogtrainerscrucible.ca, although I will tell you that our website is now badly out of date. Now that we've gotten through the Losing Lulu Summit, we're going to start working on the website. And as well, if you want to learn more about behavioral euthanasia, there is no better place on the net at the moment than the Losing Lulu Summit 2026. I hope that people will consider purchasing that. I also hope that people will consider coming to the free summit next spring. We don't have dates for you yet. We do know it'll be late April, early May. And Laura has told me I'm not allowed to have more speakers than I already had. We've tapped out. 36 is our maximum number of speakers. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the share now. And Lisa, if you
Stop
want
recording. Yes.
Yeah, and
Thank you
we can have a
so much,
conversation.
Sue.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry about the glitch.